We know that night owls have a shorter lifespan than morning folks. So you hear a lot about chronotypes. You've got the night owl and the morning lark, and there's bears and dolphins. There's all sorts of types. It's a preference. It's what I prefer to do. And modernity really enables us to lean into our preferences for the most part. I can actively restrict light after the sun goes down if I want to, or I can turn on all the blue-rich lights and suppress my melatonin production and stay up well into the night. But that does come at a cost, and we know that. When you push past your natural pressure for sleep, you are suppressing your melatonin production. And when we don't get the same levels of circulating melatonin, or melatonin is suppressed, that is correlated with insulin resistance, which leads to metabolic dysfunction. So being a night owl is associated with reduced lifespan, but I think sleep is only part of the story. Night owls will tend to eat foods when our body is not really primed to be metabolizing food. Our digestive system needs a rest too, but when we're feeding it all day long, that puts a lot of stress on the body.
Feeling confident in your skin is so much more than what you see in the mirror.
And how can you feel good? Well, that starts from within.
Welcome to the In Your Skin podcast. I'm Christy.
And I'm Anna. Join us each week as we sit down with world-leading experts and thought leaders to delve into the latest insights, groundbreaking research, and cutting-edge advancements in wellness, longevity, and beauty. So, Kristen, it is so nice to have you on here because we have been slightly obsessing over sleep and talking about it for about 2.5 years now. Now, I want to get this right. You are the global head of human performance and the principal scientist at Whoop. That is very, very impressive and quite fancy. What does it mean?
Well, I'm a psychophysiologist. So basically, I study the interrelationships between our psychological processes and our physiological responses, and vice versa. So at the heart, I'm really engaged in doing a lot of research that helps us understand really how our behaviors and how our thought patterns and our psychological functioning move around our physiological metrics. So things that we know are, associated with cardiovascular health, for example, how these behavioral and patterns of thinking and psychological functioning might move around our sleep. I look for these connections so I can help really, in the end, our members better understand how to think about their behaviors in terms of what really upgrades their ability to show up as their best version and stay healthy and uninjured, and what behaviors actually might be detracting from their ability to kind of show up as their best version. So really, I try to, using rigorous scientific research, kind of try to put this puzzle together for folks, and then, take these insights that we glean from the research and build them into the coaching and build them into the product and do front-facing education and kind of what I'm doing today, just going on podcasts and things like that to try to get the word out on some of these, around some of these insights that hopefully can help people make choices that will help them, achieve their goals. And most importantly, I think live their values with more joy and more energy. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm sort of learning a little bit more about it. And as I go, I just can't believe how much there is to something like sleep. Like everyone thinks it's very, very basic, but it's actually not. There is so much to it. So how did you actually get to where you are right now? Like where have you come from?
So I've had many careers, and I was an athlete. I played 2 sports in college. I went to the University of Iowa. I know that doesn't mean a lot, probably the folks in Australia. I don't know where the bulk of your listener base is, but
it's a good place. It's a good place to go.
It's the Big Ten, yeah. So it's a big school. So I played field hockey and basketball there, and then I went on and played for the U.S. national team. So I played your hockey rooms, and
did you win?
During the time frame that I was playing, it was literally the most successful decade of hockey that Australia has ever had. They were just so damn good. I think they won. For all the Olympic cycles I was a part of, I think they got gold. They got gold in every single one. A Champions Trophy, which is top 7 teams in the world. I think they got gold in all of those tournaments. I was in 2 of those. They were winning the Commonwealth Games. They won both World Cups, gold medal that I was a part of. So yeah, they were just so dominant. So the answer is no. I played left midfield, and I had to mark Allison Annan. So if Allison's listening, she was just the bane of my existence. She was like so phenomenal. She was just so damn fast and like just she kind of like it's like she could literally play like a man. Like she was just like the way she could just she could do everything at full speed. It was unbelievable. So anyway, I played field hockey for a long time, and then I got into coaching. So I coached field hockey at a Division I university. I started at the collegiate level, and that's where I really started getting into performance education and thinking about of course, the physiology, right? So I needed to kind of understand how to train my athletes appropriately so they could be prepared. And it's one thing to play the game, but it's another thing to actually be able to program intelligently to keep your athletes healthy and safe. So I really dug deep into the exercise physiology and the sports science, and also, realized also pretty quickly that the physiology is only half the equation. The psychological functioning and the mental health and just really kind of coaching this whole person required the psychological side. So I ended up getting a master's, kind of a dual degree in psychology and physiology. And I think that's really where I got into sleep and some of these other, big rocks that move around our ability to, control our energy production and our motivation and again, reduce illness and injury burden. So I started putting together this really robust performance education program for my athletes. And then that kind of segued into, heart rate monitoring became really popular and heart rate variability. And we started realizing, sleep is really important. And so I started building a technology at Princeton University. And, I raised tons of money, like $250,000 of angel funding, and started building algorithms to understand, sleep behavior and understand training effect and, understand the mental health component, hydration and nutrition. So I was pulling in all of this data, and that's kind of when I found out about Whoop. And I did not have hardware. I was using just kind of off the shelf fitness tracker, basically pulling in all of their heart rate data, transforming it and building algorithms off of that API. And so I found out about Whoop, and they actually had the hardware. So I was like, oh my God. And anyway, long story short, they ended up offering me a job. And this was like 9 years ago. So I left coaching and came to Whoop and
haven't looked back.
So that's kind of how I ended up here. So long story.
Love that, Kristen, that you're able to really take your passion and now doing something that you love, and globally you're looking at sleep data, which is awesome at Whoop.
Yeah.
And, as Anna mentioned, for us, it's become such an important thing in our lives, especially as mothers now and working mothers. Sleep.
And we were comparing sleep scores last night. Scores.
So what did I get? What did you get, Anna?
I was around 83.
97.
Yeah, well, she's bragging today, but for me, she's away from her kids.
Yes.
So I've got my kids, so I'm going to blame it on that. And also, obviously, very excited to be chatting to you. So,
yes,
but also I blame my kids a lot of the time.
Yeah, I did go to bed at the same time, 9:30. I woke up at 5:30. So I followed your advice. I've listened to your advice before on some other podcasts, and I was like, I'm not going to do that because that's really good advice. And I think my sleep score now has been on average around in the 90s, so that's pretty good. I actually remember listening to one of, something that you've talked about before, where you said the average Whoop member is around 65% or something like that in terms of their sleep score. What is that?
Yeah, so that's actually sleep consistency. So you're talking about sleep performance, which is basically how much sleep Whoop says you need versus what you actually got.
Yeah, right.
And that's expressed as a percentage. So you got 97% sleep performance. So basically you achieved, whatever Whoop told you got 97% of what they told you to get. So that's awesome. And basically what sleep performance will do is it will minimize the amount of sleep debt that you carry. And sleep debt is basically, the number of minutes of that I guess the delta between what Whoop says you needed versus what you got.
Okay.
Those minutes are your sleep debt. So let's say Whoop said you needed to spend 8 hours in bed and you only spent 7 hours and 30 minutes in bed, your sleep debt would be 30 minutes. And one of the cool things that we see is that when folks keep their sleep debt below like 30 minutes or below, we see that athletes in particular, so this is looking at an athlete population, they are more likely to be available to train and to compete when their sleep debt is below 30 minutes.
Interesting.
A relationship between kind of availability to train and compete and sleep debt.
Yeah.
Can you get sleep debt back? Like, is that something you can, if you have a nap during the day, are you going to get that back?
No. So naps kind of serve as something different. Number one, for most human beings, it's tough to get into physiological sleep during the daylight hours. And a lot of this has to do with your circadian rhythms. And
can you just tell us, sorry to interrupt you, but can you just talk us through circadian rhythms and what you mean?
Of course. So your circadian rhythms are, very simply, and I know you tell me how deep you want me to kind of dive in, but your circadian rhythms are basically these 24. It's a 24-hour kind of oscillation of the clock, and these circadian rhythms are basically being entrained by environmental inputs. So every human being has a clock in their brain, a master clock. It's located in the hypothalamus, which is actually at the right on top of the roof of the mouth. And it's this really amazing communicator to the rest of the body. Okay. And it gets information from the retinas. So your eyes, you have basically these rods and cones in your eyes. And some of those rods and cones are helping you are vision forming, right? Are kind of forming what you see, right? And then there's other rods and cones that are non-vision forming. These are called the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. And these cells are really, really important because when they receive light or an absence of light, that information goes directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which then signals to every cell in the body what it needs to do. When you are giving information to your suprachiasmatic nucleus that it's not expecting, so let's say that it's the middle of the night and you wake up to tend to your baby and then you go to the bathroom, you turn all of the bathroom lights on, and now all of a sudden the suprachiasmatic nucleus is getting that light input.
Right.
So it's telling every cell in your body that it's now time to be awake, okay? And if you really let that light flow in and it's super bright, it's going to be really hard to fall back asleep. Okay, so light is a really powerful communicator. And what we know from the literature that when we're seeing lots of light at night and reduced levels of light during the day, so during the biological night and their biological day, there's an increased risk of mortality. Okay, so we want to try to align to our best ability. Okay, we want to try to align this natural light dark cycle with our internal preferences. Because when these preferences, or when our internal preferences, like, because inside we want to do something at a certain time, and when we give the wrong signaling at the wrong time, that is the basis for aging and disease.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay, so when you think about our skin health and our hair health, our hormone health, right? Light behavior is one of the most important behaviors that actually inform every cell, tissue, and organ in the body.
Yeah, so that's interesting because, you heard the term beauty sleep, right? So there's actually some science behind that.
There really is, and what I'm really talking about is something that's called kind of circadian alignment or circadian misalignment. So basically this light cue is really what is going to enable us to have consistent sleep-wake times. And you said, what's the 64% or, what's that average? So that's not actually sleep performance. That is sleep consistency, okay? Which is the degree to which you stabilize when you go to bed and when you wake up. Mm-hmm. You said you go to bed at 9:30 and you wake up at 5:30, okay? And if you do that consistently, you will have 100% sleep consistency. And we know there's a beautiful paper that was published in, I think, January of 2024. So last year by this guy, Windred, and his colleagues. And it basically showed that sleep consistency or sleep regularity was a better predictor of mortality, of all-cause mortality, than sleep duration. Now, it doesn't mean that sleep duration doesn't matter. Of course it does. But sleep regularity really matters. And it's because of this relationship to our circadian rhythms and this kind of concept of circadian alignment.
Yeah, right.
So could you say, okay, I'm going to go to bed at the exact same time every night. I'm going to wake up at the same time, but I'm only going to have 4 hours sleep?
So no, unfortunately. So that's probably too short of a sleep. So we know that, somewhere around 7 hours, 8 hours, and it depends on your age, right? The younger you are, probably the more time you need to spend in bed. Your brain's developing, like it's a very metabolically expensive time. But for adults, for healthy adults that don't have sleep and circadian disorders, generally speaking, you're going to be, you're going to want to spend around 7 to 8 hours probably in bed in order to fully restore. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that, right? And, I look at millions and millions of sleep, right? Hundreds of thousands of members. So we're talking about really big data sets. And one of the things that we see is the folks who are more fit actually sleep more efficiently. And in fact, might need less sleep because their sleep efficiency is so much better. We actually see a fundamentally different sleep architecture in the highly fit folks versus folks who are less fit.
So how many hours are they getting of sleep a night, like an athlete?
So around 7.5. Okay. It kind of goes against what we think we know about duration. Now, if you are highly fit and you have a very regular sleep-wake schedule, again, you're probably going to need to spend a lot less time in bed. And we see that play out. Now, if you are on the lower fit side, really irregular sleep times, you're going to be, I think, some days you're going to end up probably sleeping way longer. Other days you're going to be sleeping less. And that's what we see in the literature. That just is a really destructive pattern that leads to all sorts of issues, mentally and physically. Okay. And it's because of this circadian misalignment. So, which leads to poor sleep quality, which leads to impaired muscle function, which leads to insulin resistance, so more prone to type 2 diabetes, fatty, liver disease, hypertension, right? So circadian misalignment is really at the heart of the issues that we see from a health perspective. So if we can align our circadian rhythms, that is going to foster a more a quality sleep experience and actually probably enable you to spend less time in bed. You probably need to go through about 4 sleep cycles. And a sleep cycle is typically about 90 minutes, right? So when you cut your sleep short, you end up basically compromising your REM sleep, which is at the back end of your sleep. And that's when all the memory consolidation and, the emotional regulation, all of those things happen. So if you're cutting your sleep that short, 4 hours, you're probably missing out on that. So I would say if you've got regular sleep time, you're physically active during the day, you are restricting, light at night, you're getting a lot of light in the morning, you're going to back into your sleep sweet spot pretty quickly.
What about for those who say that they night owls versus, someone, so they go to bed later because they say, I need to stay up at night. I go to bed at 2 a.m. Is that, a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, we know that night owls have a shorter lifespan than morning folks. And, so you hear a lot about chronotypes, right? You've got, the night owl and the morning lark. And I don't know, there's bears and dolphins. There's all sorts of types. So I think chronotype is largely a preference. I think it might be, kind of learned to a degree. There is a genetic basis, but I don't know in healthy adults, I don't think there's that much variability, okay, really between when we all feel sleepy if we allow for our natural pressure for sleep. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if we are not having caffeine after 1, we're not sleeping, taking naps after 1 p.m., if we're waking up at a similar time each day, viewing lots of sunlight, and then restricting light after the sun goes down, we're all probably going to fall asleep and feel sleepy around the same time, which is about 3.3 hours after the sun sets. And we'll all fall asleep within about 30 minutes of each other. And in fact, a doctor out of University of Colorado, Dr. Kenneth Wright, actually did this exact study. He basically put a bunch of adults on a mountain. They had no artificial light. Okay, so just natural light. Within about 48 hours, they were all falling asleep 3.3 hours after the sun sets, within 30 minutes of each other, and waking up within 30 minutes of each other. So it kind of, does this definitively say that chronotypes don't exist? Of course not. But I think we can interpret that to say, okay, chronotypes, an evening preference, a morning preference, it is just that. It's a preference. It's what I prefer to do. And modernity really enables us to lean into our preferences for the most part, right? I can actively restrict light after the sun goes down if I want to. I can just literally not turn on all the blue-rich lights. Or I can turn on all the blue-rich lights and basically suppress my melatonin production, suppress my natural pressure for sleep, and stay up well into the night. But that does come at a cost, and we know that. When you push past your natural pressure for sleep, you are suppressing your melatonin production. When you suppress your melatonin production, which is known as the hormone of darkness, it needs darkness in order to be released. And when we push past that, we basically fudge up our melatonin release. Now, the one thing that I think is relatively unclear is if I fall asleep well beyond that kind of moment where I had my natural pressure for sleep, is my melatonin compromised? And I think that this is maybe one of the reasons why being a night owl is so harmful, is that we might not get the same levels of circulating melatonin. And when we don't get the same levels of circulating melatonin, or melatonin is suppressed, that is correlated with insulin resistance, which leads to metabolic dysfunction. So there's some really interesting relationships, not to mention melatonin is really cancer protective. It's kind of a free radical like scavenger. So when we don't have circulating melatonin, we kind of don't get that benefit. So I think being a night owl, we know is associated with reduced lifespan but I think sleep is only part of the story. I think night owls will tend to, eat foods, right? And, when our body will eat late, when our body is not really primed to be metabolizing food. We are really meant to eat when the sun is up. So when we're putting, food in our body, when again, our organs and, they're just like not ready for it and not primed to metabolize food, like our digestive system needs a rest too. But when we're feeding it, all day long, for 18, 19 hours of the day, that puts a lot of stress on the body. So yeah, that's
And what happens in places like Norway?
It's hard.
Yeah.
I did a study. The study was published in May of 2023 in a journal called Military Medicine. But I looked at just that. This was in Alaska, but same sort of, northern latitude with really, really long summers, really, really short winters. And we were tasked to look at, they were suffering from a lot of mental health issues. So we ran a study to see if we could uncover kind of what was going on. And indeed, they were sleeping actually a lot longer in the winter, which is not surprising. Potentially, I would say, oversleeping in the winter, probably spending too much time in bed. And we do know from the literature that, too much sleep is also not a good thing. Again, I think there's this kind of sweet spot. And then in the winter, sleep was really reduced. And really what we saw in the end in the data and what we published was that sleep consistency predicted more positive psychological functioning in these soldiers. So soldiers who had more control over their sleep environment were using eye masks to block out the summer, and were using light strategies to wake their system up even when it was dark outside. fared better than the folks who didn't have control over their sleep environment. So controlling your sleep environment, even when you're in these northern latitudes, will go a long way toward preserving your mental and physical health during these kind of, really long summers and short winters.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So interesting.
Yeah. I read a study recently that nearly half of Australians and 66% of teens aren't getting adequate sleep every night. Why do you think we're not? Like, what is it? Is it environment? Is it?
I think it's a combination of things. I mean, modernity makes it really, really challenging to get the sleep that you need. Kids have access to devices, and if it's not in check, if parents aren't, kind of putting rules. I mean, I have two kids, I have two teenagers. So I'm fighting this all, this is a big conversation, but I think in the end, just no tech in the bedrooms it's just gotta be the way, right? To preserve their sleep. So I think a lot of it has to do with the fear of missing out. Your friends are online, so I feel like I need to be online. We have tablets, we have computers, we have TVs, we have phones, and they're all giving off this blue rich light, right? Which suppresses our melatonin. Okay, to go back to the earlier points we were making about melatonin, and the suppression of melatonin makes it hard to initiate sleep. So we just literally don't feel sleepy. And I think the other cost of bypassing this natural pressure for sleep for teenagers and adults is that you put your body into sympathetic drive. Okay. So you basically are releasing. So your body, when you bypass what your internal preference, okay, your endogenous preference, when you bypass those preferences, your body no longer feels safe. And when your body doesn't feel safe, what is it going to do? It's going to mobilize resources, right? To deal with the threat, right? And so you release adrenaline, cortisol, epinephrine, right? And, your heart rate rises, your blood pressure rises, right? To perform, right? Because your body thinks, oh my gosh, okay, something's going on because you're not sleeping, you're in the inactive phase of your circadian rhythm, but you're active. So something must be going on that we have to fight. We're going to help you fight. We're going to mount the defenses, right? But when you do that chronically, that has a cost on your mental health. It has a cost on your physical health, right? And that's kind of, I think, the problems that we're seeing right now.
Yeah. And I think, that's the thing, right? You mentioned chronic. So obviously if this is happening ongoing, you're not getting adequate sleep, it has those knock-on effects. I guess we all go through the times in our lives when we become a parent where we just don't have a choice.
Those are transient.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are transient. Those, once your child is going to, their circadian rhythms are going to, come online about 6 months or so. And so, yeah, it's going to be tough in the, when they're infants, when they're young, you have to but there's strategies that parents can deploy too, to work around short sleep or inconsistent sleep. There's other levers you can pull to offset the negative impact of maybe a more fragmented sleep experience.
Yeah, I know, because now I'm so obsessed with sleep. Even if I'm halfway through a movie that I'm watching with my husband, I'm like, oh no, it's time to go to bed. I just won't watch the rest of the movie. And I've seen so many half movies now, but I've at least had some good sleep. As mums, I know we're not getting as much sleep right now. Can we reverse that later down the track? Because if I haven't had a good 2 or 3 years of not having great sleep because of certain aspects that are going on in my life, can I just start sleeping well?
Absolutely. This is absolutely a short-term thing. I think the idea though is you need to get back on track. And I think that's where women struggle or go wrong, is they kind of keep that pattern, right? And there's no real plan to get back on track. And I think, that's why podcasts like this are just so helpful, right? So women know that, hey, this is kind of a short-term thing, and I need to just actively get a plan in place and figure out how to create those boundaries. I mean, you mentioned the, half when the movie, doesn't matter if it's over, I'm going to go to bed, because you're preserving your health. I think it's if you back up and you think about, all right, who do I really want to be in the world? What do I care about? I mean, for me, it's being present for my kids and being able to engage with them, right? And if I'm not getting the sleep that I need, I literally cannot be the human that I want to be during the day. And that's too much of a compromise for me. So I have, as a result, just created boundaries, and that means like sometimes like losing friends who just like don't, cannot get on board with it. Right. I mean, it's like you have to, I think I think we have to do everything that we can to preserve our sleep. Like it's just so important. So I think having a plan to get back on track, is the way. And can you reverse some of the damage that has been done? Absolutely. But you need to get back on track because it's not going to happen miraculously. And I will say, if you don't get back on track, you're looking at early menopause, early perimenopause, right? Like it's just very hard for our hormones to deal with inconsistent short sleep, especially for women. We are more sensitive to short and inconsistent sleep than men.
Can you tell us some more about that? Is there, when it comes to sleep deprivation when it comes to women, what are the knock-on effects, like specifically for us?
Yeah. I mean, I think like the role of estrogen in, when we look at mechanistically what's happening, estrogen basically affects your temperature, your body, your temperature regulation. And that's obviously really critical for sleep. And when you are in a situation where you're kind of chronically not getting enough sleep, or you have low estrogen already, it is going to create a fragmented sleep experience. So when our health is, not great, generally our hormones are not great. So I think that that's a place to start is making sure that we've got really robust hormone health. And when we have robust hormone health, our sleep is going to follow. So I think just recognizing that there is indeed a very strong relationship between our hormone health and our sleep. And it's bidirectional. Our sleep is going to impact our hormone health. So I think that's, if you're having irregular period or your cycle length is really varied, that is worth getting to the bottom of, right? Because that is going to impact your sleep. The higher estrogen levels are generally associated with improved sleep quality, whereas lower estrogen levels are associated with lower quality sleep. So understanding, I think that connection for women is really important at different phases of the reproductive cycle.
And we know now Whoop is now tracking your menstrual cycle. How is that going to help women?
Yeah, I mean, I think just being aware that you have different needs across your menstrual cycle is such a valuable, I think, source of insight. And it's not like massive changes, but, I think one of the things that I notice, and I, a lot of our members talk about this, is that, they used to kind of think, just based on what people told them that, during your, when you are having your period, like you shouldn't work out as much and, you're going to be less of an athlete. But that is like the opposite, right? Like we know based on hormonal profiles that is not the case. Like this is actually during menses and in ovulation is actually when your hormones are kind of, not as variable. And in fact, you can put on more load, put on more volume, more intensity. Like this is a time that you can actually go really hard and you're going to feel like you're kind of firing on all cylinders. So you want to take advantage of that time. The luteal phase, kind of the second half of your menstrual cycle, is when it's just a more metabolically expensive time. And as a result, you're going to just, need to spend a little bit more time in bed. That might be a time where you feel better reducing your volume and intensity. Maybe you don't feel as much like pushing super heavy weight, but like want to go on, long runs, like really working with your body, I think is the opportunity that these insights can give us, and understanding our body on a deeper level. And then being able to kind of match our behaviors. So we're working with our body and with our hormones and kind of not against them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Myself, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time running businesses, and I hit burnout about 5 years ago because I wasn't listening to my body and I was working, wasn't slowing down during those phases. I guess today's world's not really set up. I mean, maybe it's changed after COVID, but for women and working and pushing through when we're going through these phases, and a lot of women will probably feel the pressure, right? Because they're thinking, oh my God, it's great. I'd love to slow down and sleep more and do less while I'm in that phase. But realistically, I've got kids, I've got jobs, I've got so much on my plate. I'm doing so much. Like, how can I do this? It kind of, in a way, adds a little bit of mental stress to it too. Although we do need to put in practice some, good practices to not stress. But what do you do yourself? You're a working mom.
It's funny. As you're talking, I was like, I went through that same exact scenario. I was on the brink of collapse pretty much like, once every 2 months, same thing. I was burning the candle at both ends. I had 2 small children. I was Division I head coach. I was like going after all these coaching accreditations. I had, I was head coach of, the U17 national team. I had 2 businesses at the time as well. I had a camp, a national camp business and a club. I could not have been more like stretched thin more at that time. And, I was actually so right after my daughter was born, my kids are about 18 months apart. So I had an infant and I had an 18-month-old. And one of our businesses was like really seasonal, which my partner was running. So it was during the summertime. So he was really busy with that. So I was kind of left, I was with the kids, and my Nana just went into hospice. So she was at the end of her life, and she lived in Massachusetts. I lived in New Jersey. So it was about 5 hours away. So I was traveling back and forth on top of everything else. I had both my kids in the car. I was nursing my infant daughter, who was literally like barely 3 weeks old. And, I just was kind of like, I can do it all. I don't need to ask for help. And I literally fell asleep at the wheel with my kids in the car. And I was careening off the side of the road, and thank God, I hit the grass, and the cart bounced, and I woke up and I like slammed on the brakes, and, it was like right before careening into like, a bunch of pine trees. And I was like, fuck, I need to make changes. And, that was like, it was like 15 years ago. And I literally rebuilt my life.
I got goosebumps.
Yeah, so did I, because my dad kind of went through the same thing where he was just working, and he was traveling we lived in a place called Gobal and also Sydney. So he was traveling every week, and it was on a Friday. He was traveling from Goulburn to Sydney, and he rammed it. I think he fell asleep at the wheel, rammed in, gets me really teary. He rammed into the back of a truck, and he's fine. I'm emotional. I don't know. He's fine. It's been many, many years, but like it just shows how important sleep is. And people I just remember back in the day, I was like, I just would go out, I'd party, do all these things, and you were young, you thought you were invincible, but then you just don't prioritize that. And it's like, why aren't people teaching kids, especially at school, like why aren't they teaching them how important it is, and that they shouldn't be staying awake learning all the different subjects that they're learning and the tests that they have to learn for. Like it should be like priorities. Actually, sleep is a priority, and we've got to like really highlight that. And I think even like bring it back to like schools and teaching it from a young age, because it's only now that I'm a mom and I've got so many things going on, I see how important it is. But I kind of wish I knew back in the day. So yeah. Sleep obviously gets me really emotional.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about your dad.
He's fine. He's fine. But
I know. That's the thing, though. I mean, gosh, like there's like the 3 of us, the 2 out of the 3 of us have had, have experienced, just sleep deprivation, right? And the consequences of that, right? Like, I mean, we could have been dead,
fatal.
like just seconds, right? Away from like something really horrific. And it's, I think a lot of us are in environments where, sleep is seen as weak. And I certainly was. I was at a really prestigious university where everyone burned. It was just, that was the culture. Everyone burned the candle at both ends. Sleep was for the weak. It literally, people walked around with t-shirts that said sleep is for the weak. It was just, that was the culture. And it almost like my student athletes had to hide their sleep. So after this like big moment, I was like, okay, fuck, sleep really matters. And that's when I started that's when I started pursuing a PhD and like kind of going down this route of like sleep and circadian rhythms and trying to like understand like what is this thing?
Now we're so proud of our sleep. We're like looking at our sleep scores all the time and just wanting to get sleep when we were younger, where it was no one wanted to get sleep. And it was always embarrassing if you had too much sleep.
Yeah, it's so scary. Like, right, there's these detrimental effects that can come from lack of sleep and stress and all of that kind of stuff. And for me, gut health, after burnout, that has such a big impact on your gut health. What have you seen with the correlation between sleep and gut health?
Yeah, so this is definitely not an area that I spend too much time in. So I'm definitely not an expert, but I think we know certainly from the literature and the work that's been done that, there's a profound impact between, I think from a circadian rhythm perspective, and I can talk intelligently about that. There's the timing of our meals really does matter. And when we talk about simple levers for parents, for example, who might be experiencing irregular sleep-wake times and short sleep, one way to get hormones better under control, specifically, ghrelin and leptin, and those are kind of the hunger hormone and the satiating hormone, and, to just kind of basically work with our body would be to eat during the daylight hours and really try to, whenever our kind of first sleep period is, try to build in a couple hour buffer between your last calorie and when you intend to sleep. This will bring kind of stability to your body and in a sense of regularity, and really goes a long way to kind of helping, I think, offset some of the negative effects of kind of a short and fragmented sleep. So it's called time restricted eating, which is basically kind of consolidating all your calories within a 10 to 12 hour window and fasting the other 12 hours. So different than intermittent fasting, because that has a caloric component to it. This is purely a circadian dietary intervention, but we've seen that offsets. And we know that time restricted eating is correlated with a healthier gut biome. And obviously, all of these things interact, right? In terms of a healthy gut biome and quality sleep, we see better insulin sensitivity.
Also less stress on the body, because the stress will impact the gut. So having good sleep helps reduce the stress levels, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And I guess
reduce inflammation. Inflammation is a big piece of this, right? And you think about your gut and inflammation, like, again, all of these things are related, but yeah, I mean, that's a huge opportunity with sleep, of course, is the reduction in inflammation in time restricted eating.
Is there anything that isn't affected by having a bad night's sleep?
No.
Yeah, I agree. Everything is affected.
Your mood, just your stress levels, your capacity to handle and regulate your emotions, and then just obviously all the physiological stuff that we talked about. But yeah, chronic, short, inconsistent, low quality sleep is going to affect every single system in your body, and you will die faster.
And what are some other things that we can be doing? You did speak about food intake and when to eat.
Yeah.
What are other things that we could be doing to get a better night's sleep?
Yeah, time restricted eating is huge. I think the thing that I think folks don't realize is that our behaviors during the day are going to impact our ability to initiate sleep and are going to impact our ability to stay asleep. So they impact our ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. And one of the most important behaviors is really figuring out, all right, on average, what time can I wake up consistently? Set your alarm for that time and try to keep your wake time within 30 minutes to the left or right. Okay. So if you decide, all right, 7 a.m. is when I can consistently wake up each day, set your alarm for 7. If on the weekend you want to sleep to 7:30, that's okay. You have an early meeting, you got to get up at 6:30, that's great. But on average, you want to try to stick to that 7 o'clock the best that you can. Once you wake up, get outside, view natural light. If the sun isn't up, view as much artificial light as you can. But the key is you need to tell your body that it is time to be awake. Okay. So you need to, ideally, if you're outside looking at the sky, the sun is coming up, it's going to take 5-10 minutes to really set your circadian rhythm. Simultaneously, once that moment happens, you start building adenosine. And adenosine is basically, you've got two causes of sleep. You've got circadian rhythms and you've got sleep pressure, okay? And sleep pressure, also known as kind of process S, is basically going to start building. And you can slow the adenosine by caffeine and naps, okay? Those will both make you feel less sleepy. But generally speaking, you want that adenosine to build naturally, right? Because that's going to build. And if you allow that kind of build, you're going to feel naturally sleepy at your preferred time, like internal time, not your preferred, kind of external time, but internally, you're going to get a cue, oh, I feel sleepy. So about 16 hours after you view that first bolus of light, okay, adenosine is going to build, and 16 hours later, you're going to start to feel probably sleepy, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later. Kind of with that, You want to manage stress proactively throughout the day. This is the other thing that I think folks don't recognize that really does impact your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep is a lack of management of stress throughout the day. So you want to try to be as proactive as you can. Now, stress, what we see in the data, this is with emotion. So this is unpublished data, but I'm pretty sure we're going to get it through peer review. We've got excellent comments from the reviewers, which we've addressed. So hopefully we get a positive result. But what we saw in these data is that when we view a situation as threatening, we perceive a situation as threatening, and we perceive a situation as challenging, stress looks very similar. You have high blood pressure, you have high heart rate, and you have a low heart rate variability. Okay. Threat and challenge both look very similar. Okay. So stress is kind of stress. But what was really interesting in this data is that for the folks who perceive their stress as threatening, they had worse sleep.
Oh,
the folks who viewed their stress as challenging had a beautiful night's sleep. So stress, if you are living your values and you have purpose and you feel a sense of self-efficacy, you have the skills and resources to do what is asked of you as a parent, as a professional, whatever the role that you have in your life, as a partner, if you are able to access like gratitude and joy, you are going to be in a position to perceive the thing as challenging. And so you might have a high heart rate throughout the day, it actually doesn't even matter.
Okay.
Which is I think so fascinating, right? So your perception of your stress really matters, and making sure that you are addressing, this threatening stress by building your resources or getting help where you need to get help, right? Because again, the whole goal is to kind of try to preserve your biological sleep, right? So getting a handle on our perception of stress becomes really, really powerful. The other thing I think that's important throughout the day is trying to, we don't talk a lot about breathing mechanics and sleep, but how you breathe really matters. And you want to try to prioritize breathing through your nose versus your mouth. So really the only time that you should be breathing through your mouth is when you're talking and kissing and eating. Other than that.
Is that why they say you should tape your mouth at night?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's really a popular thing. And we actually see like the effects of mouth taping are really positive in our data. We see improvements in sleep efficiency. They're small, but still actually meaningful. And I would say do it under the supervision of a healthcare professional. But I think starting, throughout the day, taping your mouth. My son, I noticed he was a mouth breather. And so we started taping his mouth during the day when he was playing a video game or watching Star Wars or something, doing his homework. And he trained himself to breathe through his nose, and it's helped him immensely. Lots of little stories like that. So mouth taping can be a really positive way to train yourself to become a nasal breather, which we know is associated with better sleep and better health outcomes in general. Better oral health, your jaw, can get more defined when you're breathing through your nose versus your mouth.
Ooh, I like that one.
So about your breathing mechanics.
It's a good beauty tip, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about nutrients and your diet and that impact?
Yeah. So I'm more equipped to talk about the timing of things, but I think it's safe to say that distributing your macronutrients evenly throughout the day is good when your body is most primed to metabolize and utilize those nutrients. So I think I'm a big believer in, I think especially for women, making sure that you get a nice healthy breakfast. But I think just generally fueling for your activity requirement is a great way to think about food in general. I think is a really kind of healthy way to think about food. So if I am, if I really need to focus and concentrate, I kind of focus on, protein and fat. If I'm going to go work out, I'm going to have some carbohydrate. If I'm getting ready, just toward the end of the day and I know I'm more insulin resistant, I'm going to eat a lighter meal and not put as much pressure on my body to digest a huge meal. So I think for me, I think about it from this circadian perspective of when I'm really primed to utilize those nutrients, when I'm in an active phase of my circadian rhythm, which is when I prioritize my exercise and my social time and my the things I need to think about and execute on. I'm doing those during the active phase of my circadian rhythm. And that's when I'm eating a bulk of my calories.
Love that. What are you seeing your Whoop members are tracking when it comes to helping them sleep? Do they record that?
So I pulled this data because we just pulled this data pretty recently and it was so cool to see. So, okay. So based on our data, this is a massive data set. And we basically surveyed our members in terms of what they were doing to promote their sleep. And we looked at this over the course of about 3 months. And we saw that the things that improved people's sleep consistency, so their ability to stabilize when they go to bed and when they wake up, the number one thing was dimming their lights. The number two thing was blue light blocking glasses. The third thing, which was surprising to me, was sound machine.
Oh, interesting.
And what's a sound machine? Is that?
So basically just kind of the white noise. So this kind of process of like putting on your white noise and I don't know, just was correlated with sleep consistency.
Maybe because that is like when you're younger as well as a
When you're a
baby.
baby.
That's why they sleep so well. Do we need to also be rocked to sleep?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think
That'd be nice. Stroke my hair.
We have, and then basically kind of all in the same morning sun, time restricted eating, melatonin, reading in bed, and weighted blanket. All were kind of really highly correlated with sleep consistency. And then in terms of improving restorative sleep, okay, so the time that we're spending in these deeper stages of sleep, so our sleep quality, dimming lights was number one, time restricted eating was two. And this is why I just keep getting validated that the circadian kind of component is really big. And it makes sense, right? We're meant to digest like during the active phase of our circadian rhythm. So when we're trying to digest during the inactive phase, which is basically after the sun goes down in preparation for sleep or during when we should be sleeping, that just puts extra stress on our body, right? We're doing something that our body doesn't really want to be doing. And basically your body has to divert all the resources that it would, toward rejuvenation and restoration and basically digest your food. And then once it digests your food, it can kind of go back to restoring and rejuvenating. So not surprising that this was correlated with sleep quality. Melatonin. So this is exogenous. So people who are taking melatonin.
Is melatonin something you could take ongoing though, like typically?
So it's the literature. It's like every time I read a new published article, it's like contradicts what I read the previous week. So I think the research is really mixed. For some folks, it is super helpful. I definitely think that melatonin, I don't see it as this like benign, I don't know, multivitamin. Like I really, I don't know. I just feel like it's something that you want to talk to your healthcare provider about. You want to work with someone on when you should have it. Now, there's other folks who say it's completely fine and you should not worry about it at all. But I go on kind of the more conservative side. Like it's not going to interrupt your natural melatonin. And that was a paper that was just recently published, which was great to see. Because I really do think even if it's placebo, if it's helping you fall asleep and it's helping you stay asleep, it's helping you think you're getting better sleep, I am like all for it. So
and I know it's also about the right amounts as well.
Yeah. That's why it's great to, I think, work with a healthcare provider or, a sleep specialist. There's lots of just really wonderful sleep specialists out there who this is all they do. This is all they focus on and can figure out the right amount. The stuff that you're getting over the counter is usually at super physiological levels. Like it's just really high doses of melatonin that, might not be necessary. And we just don't know, like, what are the second, third order effects of that? We don't really know. So I don't know. I'm just a little bit more conservative around that. Yeah. Weighted blanket came in, morning sun, reading in bed. So a lot of the other same, behaviors as sleep consistency, but it was really cool to kind of see a lot of consensus around just light. We know that has a pretty significant impact on obviously on the release of melatonin and natural melatonin and your ability to fall asleep and stay asleep. So I think getting your light behavior at the front of the day, just frankly, getting as much light during the day safely, of course. And then after the sun goes down, restricting light.
Now, we've learned so much here today, but we want to make sure the listener can take something away and really change their life in a positive way. What would be the one thing that you would want to tell them and hopefully they can take it away and their life can be changed?
I would say to find a way to back into your natural pressure for sleep. I think modern life, has made it such where we don't even know when we feel naturally sleepy because we can view light 24/7. We've got our phones in our face all the time, right? So we're not releasing melatonin at a consistent time. And it just creates this really chaotic sleep-wake time, right? And we know that sleep-wake consistency is such an important component of mental, physical, and emotional health, right? And if we're trying to get closer to that, we want to try to regulate and make consistent our sleep-wake timing. So I think at the highest level, find a way on average to go to bed and wake up at the same time. That's kind of, I think, the big rock, in my opinion, and the biggest way to improve your health and to have like a cascade of other amazing benefits is just stabilizing when you go to bed and when you wake up.
Love that. And last question, what does it mean for you to feel great in your skin?
I said this earlier, but just literally just when I am living my values, when my behaviors align with what I know in my soul I care about, I feel like I'm glowing, and so that's literally just all I try to do every day is just make sure that my behaviors align with the things that I know I care about in my heart. And, if I can do that, I know I'll be able to show up for my kids in a way that feels really good and do quality work, impactful work. So yeah, that's what it means to feel good in my skin.
Amazing. Yes.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been so nice to chat to you.
Yes,
seriously.
yes.
We've learned so much and I hope other people have. I'm sure they will. So thank you.
Yeah. And where can we find you? Where can we follow you? Learn more about your work and what you do at Whoop?
Yeah. I mean, I try to put stuff out on Instagram. I'm admittedly a little inconsistent, but yeah, I try to, post a reel or a post. I haven't been on Instagram for that long, or a story. So when things pop up, I put them on there, and I do research across a lot of areas. So, I'll talk about a lot of the circadian behaviors and things that we're finding. I'll talk a lot about, sleep behavior, of course, and I'll talk a lot about recovery behaviors. So the impact of cold bath, for example, on markers of resting physiology and sleep, or how sauna might be impacting markers of recovery and sleep, or, I'll talk about naps and things like that. And then, oftentimes we'll do some research on just different load behaviors. So looking at training intensity and volume and how that might impact recovery and things like that. So I talk about all those things on Instagram.
Okay,
we follow you
we'll leave all the links in the show notes. Yeah, we're fangirls. No. We'll leave all your details in the show notes. But thank you so much, Kristen, for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now get home.
Yeah.